Today, we explore three bizarre medical mysteries, cases that defy explanation, where the line between life and death is distorted, where medical logic seems to be plunged into darkness. If you're fascinated by stories that leave you breathless, medical cases that no one wants to believe are true, then you've found your place. Because every week we delve into the darkest corners of the human body and mind, where science falls apart. But before we begin, a word of warning. If you're a fan of the weird, the creepy, and the mysterious, told as whispers from another world, then welcome to this place. Because here, that's all we do. We post a video once a week, each time a new path into the darkness. So if you're brave enough to go ahead, smash that like button, like you're killing something crawling on your screen. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on all notifications, so you don't miss any of the times that darkness knocks on your door again. Okay, let's get started. But remember, once you've heard these stories, you won't see the world the same way again. One cold February morning in 1987, a woman stood in front of her bathroom mirror in Dana Point, California. Her name was Janet Overton, a respected school board member, a devoted mother, and by all accounts, perfectly healthy. But that morning, something wasn't right. Janet stared at her reflection, pale, exhausted. Huge dark circles framed her bloodshot eyes. She didn't recognize the face staring back. She told herself it was just a cold, maybe the flu, something she could push through. She had a big school board meeting, makeup, hair, coffee, go. Weeks passed, and things only got worse. One night Janet bolted from bed, strangled in her sleep. Her breathing quickened, her insides twisted. She stumbled into the bathroom and vomited a black viscous liquid that stuck to the sink like oil. She shivered. Her whole body broke out in a cold sweat. The neon lights flickered. She looked up into the mirror, and for the first time, she didn't recognize herself. Her face was ashen, her eyes bloodshot, veins spidering behind her eyelids. She put a hand to her neck, feeling a strange beat, not a heartbeat, not blood, something moving under her skin. The cold she'd thought harmless had now evolved into something different, something alive, with a will, and it was taking over her. The doctor kept saying, "It's just a virus. Nothing serious. You need to rest." But Janet knew. She knew. Because every night when she lay down, it whispered, inside, like someone else breathing, using her own lungs. Janet splashed cold water on her face, trying to clear the dizziness. But when she looked up in the mirror, she saw it. A red, wrinkled patch, like a flayed corpse. Not a rash, not an allergy. It was spreading from her wrist up each knuckle, hissing as if there were claws underneath, over her elbow, up to her shoulder, then down her spine like a snake just waking up. Janet shook off her nightgown, turned her back to the mirror, and froze. Under the mottled skin, there was movement. Soft, rhythmic, like something was swimming. She felt it, hot, itchy, but most importantly, alive. Something was eating her from the inside, every cell, every fiber. That night, Janet drove off into the night in her old car. Cold sweat broke out. Her head spun. Every time she swallowed, another wave of vomit rose in her throat. Her vision began to blur. Her ears rang, and the smell of blood from her own body was lingering. She didn't go to the hospital to get treatment. She went there because she felt like she was about to lose her identity. The hospital's fluorescent lights flickered, casting a pale glow over Janet's body, now a breathing corpse. The machines beeped in short, cold tones, like a countdown timer. The fourth tube snaked like tree roots into her veins, pulling blood away without bringing anything. Her husband stood like a statue in the corner of the room, his fists clenched until they bled. Her 14-year-old son turned away, trying not to look at the festering sores that spread across his mother's face. Janet's cheeks were blistered like third-degree burns, patches peeling and oozing. Her abdomen was distended and purple, as if something was wriggling inside, gnawing at every layer of flesh. The doctors had run every test. Blood? Clear. CT scan? Normal. Immune system? Still working. No bacteria. No virus. No explanation. She's rotting, but there's no cause, a doctor whispered as he left the room, his face as white as paper. Janet began to rave in her semi-conscious state. It's crawling in my intestines. I can hear it, eating bits of me. And then at night, when no one was watching, a shadow moved across the latest X-ray. A young doctor stood frozen in front of the screen. It wasn't a tumor. It wasn't an infection. It was something moving. Bones. Eyes. They only treated the surface. Anti-inflammatories. Skin creams. High-dose painkillers. Thin patches placed over the mouth of an unnamed monster. No one knew what was eating Janet from the inside. But then, suddenly, it stopped. No warning, no reason, just silence. And her body began to heal, slowly, reluctantly, as if the predator had retreated. The doctors breathed a sigh of relief. Nothing serious, they said. It's probably an autoimmune reaction, a strange virus. Sometimes, the body heals itself. No one dared to look at her for long. No one dared to say what they feared, that Janet wasn't healed. It was just sleeping. They discharged her, gave her a prescription, some emergency numbers, and a vague piece of advice. Go home and rest. Pray that it doesn't come back. January 24, 1988. Almost a year had passed. The illness had gone dormant. Janet stood in front of the mirror, her hands shaking as she combed her hair. Underneath the foundation, her skin was pale, mottled with purple on her neck and shoulders. She smiled, a lifeless smile. She didn't tell her son that she was feeling sick again. The whale-watching trip was his dream, and Janet, used to swallowing her pain, once again pretended to be Mom. When she stepped outside, the morning light was too bright. Janet blinked. A flash of nausea passed, a buzzing in her left ear, like something moving under her scalp. She reached out to grab the car door handle, but before she could open it, her legs went limp. Janet's body collapsed to the cold ground like a broken doll. No screams. No sobs, just the sound of coffee in the thermos rolling across the cement, and her last breath dissolved into mist. Neighbors would say they saw her fall, as if someone had ripped her soul out of her body. The medical examiner would have no explanation, no toxins, no blood clots, no stroke. But in Janet's nostrils, something slimy and dark had been left. It wasn't alive, but it had never been part of this world. And Janet was just a host, a beginning. At the hospital, the doctors rushed to revive Janet. The electrocardiogram rang. A straight line. Nothing but silence. Janet was gone. Softly, as if her soul had worn away every night without anyone noticing. But it wasn't the end. Just the beginning. In the autopsy room, fluorescent lights flickered above Janet's body. The first incision slid across the cold skin. As soon as the tip of the knife entered the abdominal cavity, it emitted a vapor, spicy, sweet, horrifying. The coroner stepped back, his hand shaking as he covered his nose. The scent of almonds, unmistakable, cyanide. "It can't be," he whispered. Janet's records showed no signs of poisoning, no drugs, no exposure, no reason. And the cyanide, which had not shown up in any of the previous blood tests, had now invaded her entire body. When they opened Janet's stomach, the lining had turned to a thick, black, corrosive substance like acid. There was no food, no digestive juices, just an amorphous mass of tissue, as if something had expanded and then dissolved. A nurse vomited on the spot. Inside Janet, there was more than death. There was another form of life, a cycle, a ritual. The scent of almonds wafted over like a whisper of death. The coroner backed away from the operating table, his face pale. "It's not a disease," he whispered, his eyes still fixed on the rotting organs, as if they were being eaten away from within. He pressed the call button. His voice was dry. "We have a poisoning case." The police arrived, silent as the night. They quietly cleared out each drawer, collecting every cream, every lipstick, every packet of coffee, as if hunting for a monster in everyday clothing. The lab didn't hesitate. Selenium. In her favorite blush, in her night cream. A slow poison, slowly destroying her organs, cell by cell. And Janet's morning coffee? Cyanide. The substance was colorless, odorless, but it took on the scent of almonds when her blood came into contact with it. She didn't die once. She died every day, every cream, every sip of coffee. The killer didn't need a knife, just patience and a familiar smile. In that peaceful house, there was a man who had learned to kill through habit. The poison wasn't accidental. It wasn't mixed into the powder by a factory mistake. It wasn't dropped into the coffee cup by a kitchen accident. It was put there by the hand of the person she trusted most, her husband, her partner, the person with whom Janet shared her bed, her secrets, and once her vows of love till death. He didn't kill out of anger. He killed out of a twisted belief that she had betrayed him. And he wanted to pay her back, not with a knife, not with a bullet, but with time and decay. He started with makeup, a small amount of selenium mixed into her foundation every morning. She applied it, smiled in the mirror, unaware that she was writing a death sentence on her own skin. But Janet didn't die. She was weak. She lost her hair. She broke out in rashes. But she was alive. So he changed tactics. One morning he brought her coffee in bed. Gently, gently. And in the milk and sugar, a drop of cyanide. No smell, no color, just death. He watched her drink, without blinking. He counted each breath growing heavier, lesser, stopped. Her death was not an accident. It was not an illness. It was love turned to execution. It was trust poisoned day by day. Richard Overton was arrested, convicted, sentenced to life in prison. He died behind bars in 2009, a quiet, unmourned death. But Janet's story did not die with him, because evil does not always hide in the shadows. It has a familiar face, a warm voice, a kiss goodnight. Evil can sit across from you at dinner, touch your hand across the table, pour more coffee. Janet never knew, never once doubted. She laughed, talked, held her husband close at night, while day by day, sip by sip, drop by drop, destroyed her from the inside. Her death did not happen in an instant. It was a slow symphony, lasting months, played out right in front of her loved ones. And one of them was her killer. Thank you for sticking around until the end. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I want to know what creeped you out the most. We have hundreds of other videos waiting for you. But if you're looking for a story you'll never forget, one that makes you look around the room before you turn off the lights, this is it. Watch, if you're brave enough. Until next time, if there's a next time, remember, not all shadows are empty, not all familiar glances are harmless, and not everyone survives to tell the tale. Goodbye, or for now. On the gray, quiet afternoon of January 2024 in Newcastle, England, an elderly woman named Janet Lee sat alone at her computer, upstairs in the home she had shared with her partner for 2 decades. The only sound filling the air was his voice. Richard O'Connell, her boyfriend of 20 years, was downstairs, talking to someone. Janet tried to focus on her bank statements, but her mind was somewhere else. She couldn't stop thinking about him. And lately, things between them hadn't been right. Their love once felt eternal. Now it felt conditional. They were never married. No rings, no vows, no altar. But they lived together as husband and wife, shared every meal, every bill, every secret, even the will. Janet had written Richard's name in it, like a part of her flesh and blood. As time passed, what had once been love began to crack, small but impossible to ignore. Cold, without eyes, without unconscious touches. The future before them was no longer clear. It blurred like a bathroom mirror after a night of rain. Opaque, disoriented, broken in silence. Janet sat alone, in a room lit only by a pale yellow light. Thoughts whirled like night bugs hitting the glass. If we broke up, who would keep the house? The bank account? The will? What would Richard do with everything I had ever given him? She tried to calm herself, tried to breathe, but the uneasiness wouldn't go away. It was like something deep inside her was breaking. Then, suddenly, a scream, severe, tearing the air, from downstairs. Not the familiar call of the usual evenings, not laughter, not the call to get water, but the sound of pure pain. A scream, like flesh being peeled away layer by layer. Janet froze. The house suddenly became too quiet. It was hard to breathe, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. She didn't dare call, didn't dare step out of the room. Only the ticking of the clock's hands, like a knock on the door from another world. Murky, distant, approaching. Janet ran down the stairs, her bare heels clicking against the cold wooden steps. Her heart was pounding, and she couldn't tell the difference between footsteps and the pounding of her chest. The front door, slowly closing, slowly, eerily, as if someone had just stepped out without rushing, not running away. And then she saw him, a man, in a white blouse. The dim streetlight outside the porch barely illuminated his back. Straight, rigid, as if built, not alive. He stood still, too still. His hands hung limp, covered with something dark. She couldn't see his face, only his back, his shoulders, and something else that was eerily familiar. A chill ran down Janet's spine. She couldn't move, unable to call, A voice in her head, whispering as if from the floor. I know him. I knew him. But from where? When? Or is he a part of my memory that I have buried deep, deliberately forgotten? The door slammed. A click sounded like fingernails scraping a coffin lid. Janet stood there, in the darkness and the fading light, her legs trembling, not knowing whether to move forward or back to the cold house. As if she knew too, something had changed forever. Richard sat on the floor, his back against the sofa, his arms clutching his left shoulder. His whole body was shaking. Each moan was broken and choked, as if he was trying to swallow the pain. The light in the room flickered erratically, as if the light bulb itself was worried. Janet rushed in, her feet almost slipping on the carpet, which was dripping with water. She fell to her knees beside him, the smell of burnt skin and stale sweat hitting her face. Jane ate. Panic. What happened? Who was just here? Richard, tell me. Richard raised his head. His eyes were bloodshot, lost. His face was waxy, sweat pouring off him as if he had been drowned in ice water. Richard, whispering, voice muffled. He said, from the NHS. Just give me a COVID shot. That's it. Janet paused. A chill ran down her spine, not at the words, but at the way Richard said them, as if he were trying to convince himself. She looked down at his shoulder. The injection site was blistered, the skin turning purple and black, the veins spreading like spider webs, flickering under the skin like something was crawling inside. Janet stepped back, her hand to her mouth. The front door was still ajar. No sound of a car leaving. No sound. Just the wind whistling softly, like someone whispering right next to her ear. And from the darkness behind the stairs, a faint click, like a needle hitting the tiles. Richard brushed aside Janet's concerns. Everything's fine, he said, his voice cold and distant, a stiff smile tugging at the corners of his lips. It's just a side effect, that's all. Janet didn't believe him, not because of the words, but because of the look in his eyes, empty as dark glasses covering an abyss. For the first 12 hours, the injection site was only red. He said it was. A good sign. The immune system is working. By 36 hours, the skin around the injection site was swollen. The veins underneath were bulging like roots, and her heart was beating out of rhythm whenever she touched it. 48 hours later, the skin began to crack, oozing amber fluid, and blood began to drip onto the floor slowly, steadily, like a clock ticking down on life. Richard no longer responded. He just sat there, eyes wide, lips muttering words that had no other language like it. As Janet frantically drove him to the hospital, a strange smell wafted from his shoulders, burning flesh mixed with molten metal. And when the doctors tore off the bandages, everything underneath was black. Not purple, but absolute black. Black as the last ashes of a burned creature. Black as an abyss. Like a portal. A doctor stepped back, whispering almost inaudibly, "This is not in the medical literature." The doctors whispered to each other in the corner, their faces as white as paper, their eyes not daring to look at the wound for long. Finally, one turned to Janet. His voice trembled, as if he were reading a death sentence. "Necrotizing fasciitis," he said. "Neglectasis of soft tissue. The flesh-eating thing, inside the person you love." Janet clenched her fists on the armrests of her chair. It didn't sound like a diagnosis. It sounded like a curse. They put the endoscopy pictures on the screen. No one in the room dared to breathe. Richard's muscles were rotting not from the outside in as usual, But from deep within, something had begun to destroy. The blood vessels had changed color. The flesh was peeling off in patches like poisoned soil. The deepest tissues were blistering, gasping for air as if they were alive. Richard stopped talking. He just smiled, closing his eyes, a smile that didn't belong to him. "We need to operate. Immediately," a doctor said, his voice choked. But before that, he swallowed. His eyes glanced at the vaccination records, then back at Janet. "We need to know where this started, because this wasn't the first case." But for the first time, it was alive. Richard described the person who had injected him. Tall, in a crisp white coat. His voice was soft, reassuring, almost lulling. Claimed to be from the NHS. Showed paperwork. It all made sense. But something was wrong. Not the words. The eyes. They didn't blink, Richard said, whispering as if afraid the thing would hear. They just looked. Deep. Like they wanted to get inside you. And then Janet froze. Not at the description. Not at the words. But at the face that appeared in her mind so clearly. Not a nurse. Not a stranger. But the face of her son, Ethan. Killed 10 years ago in a car crash. Proper burial. Closed coffin. No one was allowed to see his face. Janet staggered back, clutching the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. An image of Ethan flashed through her mind, his pale, silent face, his eyes wide as they had been in the morgue. No words, no blame, just looking, just as Richard had described. His name was Thomas Kwan, Janet's own son, once flesh and blood, once heart, now a ghost in human skin. He returned, without warning, without emotion, without soul. Eyes as empty as bottomless water, a voice as soft as anesthetic, and a plan so clean it was terrifying. He pretended to be a medical worker, wearing a white coat, fake papers, perfect tone. No one suspected. And then he injected Richard. Not a vaccine. No antibodies came. Only death. Iodamethane. A poison used to kill worms, and now to kill people. Seeps through blood. Eats away tissue. Silent. No smell. No trace. Like a goodbye kiss from a loved one. Why? Not out of hatred. Not out of madness. For the house. The old walls. The dusty attic. The hallways he ran in as a child. Now spoils of war, with a single prick. Thomas didn't just kill. He wiped out the presence of family. With a single dose. Janet didn't know she was opening the door to a monster. No roar. No claws. Just a man with a gentle smile. And her own blood. Her own son. Thomas. Who had returned not to visit his mother, but to end the man she loved more than life itself. But Richard didn't die. He held on. In the hospital bed, in delirium, under the cold surgical lights, he struggled between life and darkness. Each time he opened his eyes, he was a different figure. Less flesh, more stitches, less hope. But he was still alive. And Thomas, arrested, tried, 31 years in prison. The numbers were as dry as the sound of handcuffs closing. But no one dared to ask, why stepfather? Why flesh and blood? No answer. There was only silence that stretched like a rope around Janet's neck. And the scars, not just on Richard's shoulders, but on Janet's arms, where she'd held Thomas as a newborn. On her chest, where her heart no longer believed in blood. And in her dreams, where she still saw Thomas standing in the doorway, smiling. as if there had never been sin, as if there had never been hell, as if there had never been a person. Now the house was silent again, not peaceful, but a silence as thick and stifling as an unsealed grave. The walls were still there, witnessing everything. The floorboards still creaked, as if moaning something unsaid. But deep inside the house, something was still breathing, a rotting secret, echoing in every empty hallway, like the footsteps of an unburied past. That woman had thought the worst thing was a broken heart. She was wrong. The greatest fear was not loss, but looking into the eyes of her own child and no longer recognizing anything in them. Because there are demons that do not need to knock. They are born right in our hearts, and sometimes the horror has no scream. It smiles with a familiar face. On a bright, humid afternoon in August 2014, 24-year-old Angela Lyons cruised slowly through the bustling streets of Vietnam on a rented moped. She had arrived from Scotland just a week earlier, seeking adventure, relaxation, and perhaps something she never could have imagined. Angela had spent her days drinking in the sunlight, the food, the nightlife, and the murky waters of the rivers nearby. But today felt peaceful, normal, harmless. That illusion was about to break. As Angela drifted through the flow of traffic, she turned her head briefly and was suddenly thrown forward. Her moped had slammed into another. She hit the ground hard. Dazed but conscious, she stood up. Her helmet had protected her. The other driver was fine too. No anger, no injuries, just a shared nod, and they went their separate ways. But something had already changed. Angela raised her hand to her head, tracing it along her hairline. Just a small bump, no broken skin, no blood, nothing alarming. A minor accident, she reassured herself. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, as if to wash away the last remnants of the impact. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'm okay." But she didn't know something else had followed her home. Something the doctors wouldn't find on the scans. Something painless, shapeless, nameless. It had crept in quietly as her consciousness faded, as her body lay motionless on the pavement. It didn't need a door, just a crack. And now it was there, deep inside, quietly watching, breathing with her, waiting. That seemingly overturned collision out there on the road was just the beginning. A week later in Glasgow, Angela sat silently in the cold clinic. The 4 blank white walls reflected the pale fluorescent lights, making her feel as if she were being scrutinized from within. The bright, sunny memories of Vietnam were now fragments, faint, unfamiliar. They did not fade away naturally. They were pushed out. Instead, something new had crept in. Sudden, violent nosebleeds that felt as if something were tearing her apart from the inside out. No warning, no reason, just blood, hot, bright red, flowing in streams, soaking through her handkerchief, her shirt, her sleep. The doctor glanced at the symptoms, frowned slightly, then smiled. "It must be the weather," he said, his voice even. "Your body is just adjusting." He did not look closely, did not listen, did not feel. Angela did. Deep in her chest, somewhere beneath her skin, a movement, slight but not hers. Not the air conditioning, not allergies. It was an intrusion, an implant. Something expanding. She said nothing, just nodded, and walked out of the room. The doctor went back to his notes. He didn't see. A thin line of blood just beginning to seep from the corner of Angela's eye. A few days later, Angela stood before the mirror in the dim bathroom. The broken yellow light covered her face like a fake skin. Her nose ripped crimson, as if bleeding from inside her skull. Her eyes wild, bloodshot from lack of sleep. She no longer recognized herself. Following the doctor's orders, she reached for the Vaseline, her fingertips trembling slightly. A repetitive habit, a hopeless ritual. But this time, something was different. As her fingers touched the inside of her nostrils, she felt it. A movement. Slight, but deliberate. Not a reflex. Not an illusion. But life. Something was inside her. Not blood. Not soft tissue. But something. Deep, stirring, as if waiting to be called. Angela paused, her heart pounding, then summoned all her courage and pressed hard against the moist skin. Instantly, a sharp pain like black fire exploded in her skull. Her eyes rolled back. Her entire body felt as if it had been pierced by a cold drill. She fell to her knees, her mouth open in absolute silence. No scream. No sound escaped, only something hissing inside. A laugh or a cry. I couldn't tell, but it wasn't hers. Blood poured from her nose like a broken faucet, hot, thick, relentless. Angela staggered, her vision blurring as if the world were melting around her. Her head was pounding. Her pulse was pounding. There's something inside me, she whispered, not knowing who she was talking to. No one answered. She dashed into the emergency room in a daze, the towel in her hand as soaked with blood as raw meat. Her steps were heavy, as if someone had pinned her to the floor. The air around her was thick, as if she were swimming through a mist of blood. A young nurse ran over and helped her sit down. She tilted Angela's head back, holding a small flashlight close to her nostrils, then stopped abruptly. Her eyes were wide, unblinking. Her mouth opened as if to say something, but didn't. No words, no movement. She stood still, as if petrified. And then, without turning back, the nurse quietly withdrew, stepping back down the long hallway, and disappeared into the darkness without a word. Angela sat there, alone. The bloody handkerchief dripped to the floor. No one came. No one called her name. And deep inside, the thing was laughing. Angela sat up, her whole body shaking, her heart pounding as if it were about to burst. There was no room for reason, only pure panic. The nurse whispered, her voice choked. Stay calm. I need to call a doctor. But calm was too far away from her now. The fear had penetrated deep into her bones. Angela shook her head, not waiting for anyone. She felt it moving, creeping, deep in the hollows of her face, behind her eyes, behind her forehead, like something wriggling beneath her thin skin. A few minutes later, the truth emerged, like a corpse floating in a still lake. It wasn't the impact. It wasn't the climate. It wasn't her body reacting. It wasn't her body anymore. It had entered. Not through her mouth, not through the wound. It crept into her like a curse, seeping through the cracks between consciousness and unconsciousness. It didn't die. It wasn't eliminated. It learned to stay. And now it was awake, swimming in the warm, murky waters of a river in Vietnam. Angela had unwittingly invited it in. An intruder nearly 3 inches long, as slimy as clotted blood. A leech. It didn't bite. It didn't tear. It just slithered in, through her nose, through her sinuses, then clung to the darkness inside her skull, as if that was where it was meant to be. behind her eyes where the light couldn't reach. It lived there, breathing with her, sleeping with her. Day by day, hour by hour, it drank her blood drop by drop. It separated her brain from hers by a thin layer of bone, as thin as breath, a thin wall between her human consciousness and her parasitic instincts. It had lived inside her for over a week, undetected, unresisted, unrepelled, just waiting. Wait until she gets weak. Wait until she starts to hear the whispers in her head. Not thoughts, not fear, but that whisper, hunger. For 30 terrifying minutes, the doctors fought something that did not belong in the human body. Clamp, suction, cut. But the creature, it clung like a curse sewn into the brain. It did not want to leave. It shrank, writhed, hissed silently in the darkness between bone and blood. Then finally, in a suffocating pull, it slid out, soaked in blood, twitching, alive, no longer hungry, but breathing, knowing. Angela lay motionless, cold sweat drenching her back, her eyes fixed on the thing that had just left her body. A slippery black strip of flesh, twisting like a shapeless horror. It had been inside her. It had lived with her. It knew her heartbeat, her pulse, her nightmares from within. She did not scream. She did not cry. Just staring, as if she had just given birth to something that did not belong to this world. She had returned home from her trip with a souvenir, not an embroidery, not a delicacy, but a parasitic memory, a living testament to how the human body could be invaded and still pretend to be herself. Angela survived, physically, but something didn't leave with the leech. Somewhere inside her, a tiny dark slit at the back of her skull was still empty. Sometimes in the middle of the night, when the wind whistled through the bathroom window, she felt a slight twitch behind her left eye, or a dull itch in the deepest part of her nostril. No pain, just knowing. She reached up to touch it, cold. She held her breath and listened. Nothing, no one, just the sound of her heartbeat, and a question that had never been answered. Did they take it all? Or was it just the surface?